What if I told you that the UK government at this point in time is thinking about introducing a 1% deposit scheme to help first-time buyers get on the property ladder? You might think, well, this is really, really good news, and ordinarily I would be in support of these kind of initiatives. However, it would be disastrous for first-time buyers, not only because they will be exposed to extortionate interest rates, but also they're going to be exposed to a much, much higher risk of negative equity. Now, considering we in the UK have the 5th largest economy in the world, you have to start asking, how on earth did we get here? Now, if you go back over our history over the course of 175 years, there's quite an interesting picture to be painted when we start to compare UK average house prices and the UK average wage. And Schroders took a look at this back in 2023, and in their report, there's some very, very interesting data that I want to share with you. But first, let's have a look at one data point that they led with, which was house prices and annual salaries. Now, interesting, if you look at the 1960s, the golden 60s, back then, the average house price was about 4.5 times the annual wage. Now, in the Schroders report, they were looking at data from 2022 for their 2023 report. And in 2022, the average house price was £294,559, whilst the average salary in the UK was £32,278. That means that back in 2022, the average house price was 9.1 times the average wage in the UK. And the crazy thing is, if you look back over 175 years, we haven't seen those numbers out of kilter since the 1800s. In fact, property prices in London are 12 times an annual wage of someone working in London. It is absolutely crazy. So, we're in a bit of a pickle, we're in a bit of a mess, and we're in a mess because of a very simple economic equation: supply versus demand. And that equation tells us that if we have something that is in high demand but low supply, the thing that is in low supply will have its price increase exponentially because of that demand. Now, Schroders did have a look at home building data over the past 100 years. And you may not be surprised to hear that we're currently at the lowest rate of home building since 1926. In fact, when you look at local authority builds specifically, that did peak and trough over the past 100 years. However, it almost ground to a halt in 1988. And when you look at periods between 2000 and 2006, there were almost 0 local authority homes built for that 6-year period. That's why we're here. Now, for first-time buyers, I'm completely aware that I've painted a really bleak picture, but that's the reality. But the truth behind the reality is that it's a failure of successive governments to build the number of homes required to meet the demand of a growing population. And over the past 10 years, we've seen UK wages stagnate. And the mix of this two is where we are right now. This is the byproduct of the mix of those two things. And for many first-time buyers, I hear it so much within my social media messages: should I buy or should I rent? And for many people, it's getting further and further out of reach. And so what I wanted to do with this video is introduce you to a very simple formula that you can throw into the mix whilst you're trying to deliberate, whilst you're trying to find the answer to this question for yourself. Now, it is a simple formula. It isn't going to be the oracle. Yes, you're going to have other considerations, complex considerations when you get into the nuance and the context. But I'm hoping this formula will help you because it has been used globally for some time now. So the formula we're going to be looking at is the price to rent ratio. And this is a formula that has been used globally in the real estate and property sector for a number of years now. And the formula is actually very, very simple. What it tries to do, it takes the average sales price of a property that you might want to buy, and it also looks at the average annual cost of rent to rent said property. And by dividing the two, you end up with a number. And the number gives you an indication of what the recommendation is for this conversation of whether it is worthwhile buying that property or renting that property in the short term. And the short term is a key thing. And if you stay towards the end, I'm going to give you some really important things to think about in trying to answer this question as well. So within this formula, there are 3 possible outcomes. So the first outcome is that you end up with a number which is greater than 20. And if you end up with a number greater than 20, it means that potentially you're going to be better off renting a property in the short term rather than buying. you're going to have a middle outcome, which could be that you have a number where you're somewhere between 15 and 20. And this is a gray area. This means that there will be other circumstances, your personal circumstances, other considerations that you need to bring into the equation to decide whether or not to buy or to continue renting. And the third outcome is, well, you have an outcome which gives you a number below 15, which is a clear indication that in that example, you'll be better off buying rather than renting, certainly in the short term and long term. Let's put some meat on the bones to each of those scenarios right now and run through some examples so you know how this works in practicality. So here's scenario one. So in scenario one, let's just say you live in London and the property that you want to buy has a cost of £500,000. And when you look at the cost of renting said property in this example, the cost of it annually is £20,000. Well, when you divide 500,000 by 20, you're going to end up with 25. Now that number is greater than 20. So in this example, the formula suggests that you'll be better off renting this property than buying it because it's more cost effective to rent in the short term. Scenario two. So let's just say you live elsewhere in the country and the property you're looking to buy is priced at £300,000. And when you go and have a look at the comparable rate to rent this same property, it comes out at £18,000. So according to the formula, you would divide 300,000 by 18,000. You're going to come up with 16.67 if you round it up. Now in this example, you are between the numbers 15 and 20. And so the formula suggests that this is a gray area and your personal circumstances will now take precedent in the decision as to whether or not you should buy or rent that property. And you could be in a situation like many people have been recently where they're just tired of having a landlord and they're tired of having to deal with inflationary rent increases ever so often because, you know, mortgage rates have gone up and so on and so forth. It might be a case that you're living in a place where actually this is just not the place for you. You could be living with your parents and you're desperate to move out so you can gain some independence. Economically, it would make sense within this range because you're between 15 and 20. So personal circumstances will take precedent in your decision here. In scenario number three, you may be living in a part of the country where the cost of the place that you would love to buy is £400,000, and when you look at the equivalent cost of renting that property, it's £30,000 per year. Now, when you divide 400,000 by 30,000, you're going to come up with 13. And in this example, because the number is less than 15, it means that in this example, it would be a great idea for you to actually buy the property as opposed to rent short term. So that's just how the price to rent formula works. But like I've already said, this isn't going to be the only thing for you to use. This is quite a complex question. And I want to leave you with maybe just a few thoughts that are going to be really, really important in your deliberations for this. And the first one is the long-term impact of renting. At the end of the day, what we're all working towards is some kind of financial security in some way, shape, or form. And I'm speaking to first-time buyers who are looking to purchase their first home as a residential property. I'm not talking about investments, okay? This is, you are going to live in this property. Now, from a long-term point of view, what I believe, at least, that one of the worst places you want to be is that you get to retirement and you still have to consider rent. You're still going to be at the mercy of potential rent inflation increases, so on and so forth. And so having a mortgage, paying off your property by the time you've got to your retirement phase of your life is really important because it takes out probably the most expensive part of your monthly costs by the fact that you've paid off your mortgage over the course of the years that you've owned it. And I think for many people trying to ponder this buy or rent equation, that is something to keep at the front of your mind. And this leads to another conversation around, if you do decide to rent, what are the things that you should be focusing on? I'll do a separate video on that altogether. The second thing that I think is really important for you to consider is, within this formula, it is only one thing. If you do have your deposit and you've worked hard to get your deposit, you're also going to have to contend with the affordability criteria that the banks also require you to pass. I made a video on that. I'm going to link it somewhere up here. I this year have been sharing, more of my own story in these videos. And look, I managed to get on the property ladder in my mid-30s, and it was tough. It was hard. I never thought I would be able to own a property, because I've been homeless, I've slept on the streets. The idea of owning your own property when you slept on the streets like I did, for some people it's out there. And for a very long time, it was out there for me. I think more than anything else, one of the big things that is causing people to perhaps lose faith that they can buy a property is the high barrier to entry by way of deposits. And I just have to say this, look, income is very important here. I was lucky enough to work in a place where I was able to earn good money, and for a long time I squandered it. It wasn't until I got my head right, my head straight, and if you read my book, I talk about it in the book. I had a conversation with someone that really changed my perspective. And I think that's true for many of us. If you're working and you're earning good money, and getting the property ladder is one of your things, you can do it, but you just got to get this right. You've got to get your headspace right. You've got to be intentional, like really, really intentional, because otherwise it's not going to happen. It's not an impossible task. It needs intention. And so, look, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was informative in some way, shape or form. Let me know what you think in the comment down below. Here's a question for you. Are you one of those people that are considering whether you're going to ever buy a property or whether you should just continue renting? Let me know in the comments down below. Catch you later on.